talking about becoming disciples of Jesus, apprentices of Jesus, these last few weeks as we dive into this next season of us as a church. And so we're looking at these three goals, right, of being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and doing what Jesus did. These three super important things, which clearly I get in the wrong order, but that's okay. We'll get there. We're on a journey together, right? So we will be doing this by adapting the habits or practices of Jesus that we see in Scripture. Things like prayer, fasting, solitude, Scripture, community, simplicity, generosity, hospitality, all these things that we see Jesus doing. And so this Sunday is week 2 in our 4-part series, all about practicing Sabbath.
And as we talked about, information alone does not result in transformation, which is why it's important that we practice the way of Jesus so that we can take the things that we learn and build them into habits, into muscle memory, so they're things that almost become automatic to us. And so whether your first attempt at practicing Sabbath this last week was an amazing success and it was fantastic and incredible, or whether it was a complete disaster, or whether it just completely didn't happen at all, it's okay. This is all part of the process, the journey that we're on into learning how to practice these habits of Jesus.
Yes. So last time we gathered, I guess I should say, we looked at how there are 4 meanings of the Hebrew word Shabbat or Sabbath, which constitute the 4 movements of the Sabbath. And those 4 are stop, rest, delight, and worship. So last time we looked at stop, and that's what we practiced in our Sabbath this week, hopefully. And this week, it's rest. We're going to be looking at rest.
So, but before we jump in, remember last week we talked about how we don't just change from our experience, we change when we reflect on our experience. So hopefully you guys have the companion guidebook with you that we gave you last time, 2 weeks ago. Remember to bring that each week. If you don't have one, we have some spares. And if you didn't get one last time, we can give you one of those there as well. But to begin with, we're going to turn to the Sabbath reflection on page 29. So if you have one of those, open it up. And if you don't, maybe John, you could give those out to anyone who doesn't have one. If you have one at home, it'd be great if we can get that back afterwards. If you didn't get one last time, then it's yours. Keep it. So once you've got your guidebook, your companion book, turn to page 29, and hopefully on page 29 you'll find a little Sabbath reflection there, and hopefully you were able to complete that between practicing your first Sabbath and today. But if not, that's okay. If you weren't, maybe you weren't here last week. Maybe you forgot your book. Maybe you didn't have a chance to complete the Sabbath reflection. Maybe you just forgot all about it. Maybe you couldn't be bothered. In a moment, we're going to get into groups and just share what you wrote down in as much depth as you feel comfortable with sharing. And if you didn't write anything down, that's okay. Then just share those answers as you go. And if you weren't here last time and you haven't practiced Sabbath and so you have nothing to reflect on, then just feel free to speak generally to those kind of thoughts and ideas. So, in a moment, we'll get into groups of 3 or 4, and as I said, just share as much as you feel comfortable with from your Sabbath reflection.
Yes, so the 3 questions that are going to guide us through this time of discussion are: where did you feel resistance? Where did you feel delight? And where did you most experience God's nearness as you were practicing Sabbath?
As I said earlier, last week we looked at stop. This week we're looking at the next movement of the Sabbath day, which is to rest. And the spiritual journey that we're all on begins with desire, right? It begins with wanting to follow Jesus, wanting to be transformed into a new kind of person. And really, desire is the engine of our life. Desire is the drive that gets you out of bed in the morning. But ultimately, if you pay attention to the way of the world and you pay attention to your own heart, you realize that your desires that you have are never actually fully satisfied. 1,000 years before Jesus, the writer of Ecclesiastes wrote, "The eye is not satisfied with seeing." More recently, it was put a slightly different way. "I can't get no satisfaction." It means the same thing. No matter how much we get, it's never enough. Thomas Aquinas once asked the question, what would it take to satisfy human desires? What would it take to satisfy human desires? And the answer that he came up with was everything. It would take everything. We would have to experience everything and everyone and be experienced by everything and by everyone to actually finally feel fully satisfied. In short, we would have to be infinite. But here's the problem, you guys. We're not infinite, are we? We're finite. And so the reality is that we live with chronically unsatisfied desires. The word that's used by the writers of the Bible for this inner disquiet is restlessness. We are restless. It's an ancient problem that's rooted in human nature. It's always been there, but it's been particularly manipulated by a culture of consumerism that we live in, particularly by advertising, which really at the end of the day is basically an attempt to monetize restlessness. You know, we see upwards of 4,000 ads every single day. 4,000 ads. And each and every one of those ads is designed to leave you feeling unsatisfied. To feeling like you want that thing, you want that item, you want that new car, or you want that new house, or you want that new gadget, or whatever it might be that pops up on your Instagram feed all the time. And the sad reality is that it works, doesn't it? We fall for the old carrot on a stick routine every time. We're always chasing more money or more clothes or more things or more square footage or more experiences or more stamps on our passport or more relationships. More. We always want more, but the problem is that it's never enough. Rest is always just out of reach. We run hard after what we want, only to find that when we get it, there are 10 other things that we don't have that we now want, right? Is it just me or anybody else? It's like we're running on a hamster wheel, round and round and round and round in circles. But is there a way to get off of the hamster wheel? Is there a way to fight against the restlessness of the human heart? I think you've probably guessed that the answer is yes, and that the answer is Sabbath. Sabbath is that practice from the life of Jesus by which we go to war against the restlessness of our age. And we take on the easy yoke of Jesus, our rabbi, so that we can find the rest for our souls that he promised us. The rest that Jesus offers is the antidote to the restlessness that the whole of humanity feels. Turn with me to Genesis chapter 2 if you've got a Bible. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 2. It says, "By the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and he made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." I don't know about you guys, but when you think about the word rest, what comes to mind for me is sleep or a day off or just kicking back and watching TV. Like that's automatically, that Josh is nodding. He's like, yep, with you there. Sleep, a day off, kicking back, watching TV. That's my idea of rest. But the idea behind this word Shabbat, Sabbath, is far more. It's holistic rest. It's what Jesus called rest for your souls. It's rest for the whole person. And so on the Sabbath, we rest from work. Not just paid work, but all work. Not just rest from our jobs, but all kinds of work, including chores and errands and to-do lists. We rest from it all on Sabbath. That's the whole idea. But it's not just we're resting from doing work, we also rest from thinking about work. Neuroscientists have demonstrated that when we think about work, our brain secretes the same stress chemicals as if we were actually in the office doing the tasks of work. So even though you're sitting at home on your couch watching TV, every time you think about work, it's actually the same to your brain as if you were in the office sitting at your computer. So we don't want to just rest from doing work, but rest from thinking about work. But it's not just resting from work on the Sabbath. Here's the key to getting off the hamster wheel. The hamster wheel of restlessness. The key is to rest not just from work, but to also rest from wanting and worrying. We don't just rest from work, we rest from wanting and worrying. So let's unpack this a little bit more. We're going to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Flip over to Deuteronomy chapter 5 with me real quick. Or scroll, as the case may be. So last week we saw how the Sabbath is not just a good idea, but it's something that God commanded in the Ten Commandments. And I don't know if you know this, but the Ten Commandments are actually recorded twice in the Old Testament. They're recorded once in Exodus 20 for the first time. That's at Mount Sinai, just after the Israelites have left Egypt, they've left their captivity, and God gives Moses, the people's proxy, the law, on Mount Sinai. And so they're recorded right there. But then they're recorded again in Deuteronomy chapter 5 when the nation of Israel is right on the edge of the Jordan River. They're about to cross over the river and finally enter the promised land. So that means that between Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, there's about 40 years. 40 years between these two instances of the Ten Commandments being recorded. So Deuteronomy chapter 5 is for the next generation. It's for the generation who either were infants or hadn't even been born at the time that the Ten Commandments were first given in Exodus chapter 20. And the Sabbath command is still in there, in the Ten Commandments. Didn't go anywhere, but it's a little bit different this time around in Deuteronomy chapter 5. So take a look at verse 12. Man, I'm going to have to start bringing my reading glasses to church. Verse 12. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So there are two differences between the Sabbath command we find in Exodus 20 and the Sabbath command in Deuteronomy chapter 5. The first one is a fairly minor difference. In Exodus, it says, remember the Sabbath. Whereas here in Deuteronomy, it says, observe the Sabbath. The word observe, the Hebrew word, it means to watch over or to guard. Think about how we observe a holiday like Christmas. Like we guard it, don't we? We protect it. We make it special and unique. We don't allow it just to become another everyday, ordinary day. It's a special day, and we make sure it's special. We do special things. We don't just do ordinary, regular activities. We don't do laundry generally on Christmas, do we? It's the same kind of idea with the Sabbath. It's a weekly holiday. That's what the Sabbath is. It's a weekly holiday. And we're supposed to keep watch over it so that it doesn't just become another ordinary day. In the Kaddish, which is the traditional ceremony that kicks off Sabbath, it involves lighting 2 candles to remember those 2 commandments, to remember the Sabbath, but also to observe the Sabbath. So that's the first change. And then the rest of the command is exactly the same until we get to the end, where there's a major change. In Exodus, it says, "For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." That's Exodus. But in Deuteronomy, it says, "Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm." So it's the same command, but it's a different rationale behind the command. It's a different reason for keeping the Sabbath command. In Exodus, the rationale is grounded in the story of creation. But in Deuteronomy, the Sabbath command is grounded in the rationale and the story of liberation. You were, past tense, once upon a time, you were slaves in Egypt, but you are not slaves anymore. At Sinai, Sabbath is about rhythm. You remember last week we talked about the rhythm, the 6-in-1 rhythm that God wove into creation. But in Deuteronomy, Sabbath is about resistance. Let's go a little bit deeper. And this whole idea of how Sabbath is about resistance. In the story of God bringing his people out of Egypt, there's all sorts of talk and all sorts of language about restlessness. If you were just to look at Exodus 5 alone, here are 3 examples. Why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Make the work harder so they keep working. And then thirdly, Pharaoh said, lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That's why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks. And the story, Pharaoh, the Egyptian king, is a tyrant. No matter how hard the Hebrews worked, it was never enough. They lived under the oppressive yoke of the daily quota. More, 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 more. You have to produce more. It says in the Bible, it tells us exactly what it was that the Israelites were building. It says that they were building supply cities. They were building entire cities to store all of Pharaoh and all of the Egyptian people's extra stuff. All of the stuff that they didn't have an immediate use for, all the stuff they were saving up for a rainy day. The Israelites were building entire cities to store up all of that extra stuff. And the economic system of Israel was built on the back of slavery. You know, to get the lavish, opulent lifestyle of Pharaoh or even an ordinary Egyptian, you needed cheap labor to do all the work so that you could have a rest, right? And here's the thing, slaves don't get a Sabbath. If you're a slave, you're subhuman. You're a commodity to buy and to sell. And slaves only have value in what they produce. They work all day, every day, until they die. That's what it means to be a slave. But rest is what comes when you're set free by God. So the command here in Deuteronomy is, hey, remember, you are not slaves anymore. You're in a new kingdom. You're under a new king. There's no daily quota. There's no taskmaster over your head the whole time. And this is really important, part of that command to the Israelites, remember that you're never to become a slave driver yourselves. Make sure that your sons and your daughters and your servants and even your livestock, they also get to Sabbath. They also get a day of rest. All are equal under the Sabbath. All rest under the Sabbath. And here's the thing. We need this practice more than ever, because let me tell you that Pharaoh and Egypt are alive and well today. While Egypt was obviously a very real empire that has a historical significance, it's used in the Bible along also with the empire of Babylon as an archetype, as a symbol of all empires going down through all of the ages. What is it that you find on the back of a $1 bill? A pyramid. You find a pyramid on the back of a $1 bill. It's the symbol of empire, but it's an unfinished pyramid. And on one hand, that's positive, because it says, hey, America still has a ways to go. That's a good thing, right? But then on the other hand, it's also a negative, because it says there's always a desire for more. We always want more, which is particularly apt given that it's on the back of a $1 bill. Egypt is a running theme throughout Scripture for a culture of restlessness. And there are so many examples of cultures of restlessness down throughout the ages and in the world today. I mean, we don't have to look very far, do we, for a nation that's built on a culture of restlessness. We all live in one. Egypt is what happens in a culture of unchecked desire for more. When we want more and more and more, and we always want more, we get Egypt. We get this culture of slavery. We get this culture of desire and wanting more. The Japanese have a word, karoshi, and it means death by overwork. But here's the thing. Us Americans work 137 hours more a year than the Japanese do. We work 260 hours a year more than the Brits. And we work 499 hours a year more than the French. Americans work more than any other nation in the world. And yet, in the 1960s, with the rise of so-called labor-saving devices like dishwashers and central heating and computers, futurists predicted that just within a few decades, we'd be working no more than 20 or 30 hours a week and living in leisure. But yet leisure time is down 37% since the 1960s. We've created and come up with more and more different things to help save us time, but yet we're working more, not working less. And we have more than ever before. We spend, as a nation, 2 to 3 times more on goods and services than we did in 1945. Homes are on average 3 times larger and full of twice as many things as they were in 1945. The average home in America has over 300,000 items in it. 300,000 items. And we don't have storage cities, supply cities like the Egyptians had, but we do have 2.3 billion square feet of self-storage space. That's 7.3 square foot for every person in the nation. But yet, we have so much, and yet there are people all around us hiding in plain sight who sometimes are barely able to put food on the table or are not even able to make rent for any given month. And despite having all this more stuff, we're actually unhappier than we've ever been before. The statistics show that happiness levels peaked in the 1950s, and they've been declining ever since. We're getting less and less happy as people and less happy as a culture. Interestingly enough, the time that those happiness levels peaked and then began to drop is right around the same time that blue laws in the United States, laws that banned work, stores opening on a Sunday, began to be repealed over time. We got less and less happy as the Sabbath began to slowly disappear. So to sum up, we work more than ever before. We have more than ever before, but yet we're still not happy. It's Egypt all over again, and it's just so easy to get sucked into the culture in which we're living, where you just feel like you have to work that few more hours just to get a have. You have to reach a certain standard of living to be happy. You just have to own X number of pairs of shoes or X number of outfits or have X number of square footage in your house to be happy. You have to participate as part of the economy that we've built, even though it does great harm to both the poor of the world and to the earth itself. And it's easy just to say, well, that's how it is. That's like the culture we live in. We don't have a choice. We just go along with what culture does and what culture says. But hey, the thing is, it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to go along with the way that this culture is being built. Rest is an act of resistance. It's an act of defiance against Pharaoh and his empire. It's a way of saying with our bodies, enough. Enough is enough. Enough work. Like work is a good thing. God created work. He has work for us to do. It's not a bad thing at all. But work is not the thing. Enough stuff. Stuff isn't bad. But most of us probably have enough stuff, don't we? Sabbath is a way to break our addiction to the twin gods of the West, accomplishment and accumulation. That's what we're living for. There's a new book that just came out. I think, I can't remember what it's called. I literally read about it this week. And I think it's called De-Churching. I don't even think it's been released yet. But the idea of the book, it's asking the question, why do people not come to church? Because people's lives have been built around these two twin gods of accumulation and accomplishment. And people's lives are so busy that if something doesn't either help me become more accomplished in my career, in my life, or help me accumulate more stuff, it's not worth my time. And that is, apart from, yes, there's all sorts of reasons about failings in the church and all sorts of things that different high-profile pastors have done to turn people off of church. But actually, the biggest reason is people are going after these two twin gods of accomplishment and accumulation. And anything that does not help them meet those two goals is out the window. So church is out the window. But here's the problem. Church is the place where you find community. Church is the place where you find connection. Church is the place where you find meaning and purpose. And so there's a whole generation of people wandering out who don't have those things, who are living silos. They're just on their own, going after accumulation and accomplishment. And the answer to purpose and significance and happiness in their life is right there. It's Jesus. It's being part of the community of Jesus. It's following Jesus and becoming his apprentice and doing it together. But they're missing out on it because they don't have time to come to church. Because church doesn't help them accomplish anything or accumulate anything. Later in the Old Testament, there are Sabbath commands against buying or selling on the Sabbath. And so, for us as a family, Zoe and I, on our Sabbath, we're trying to apply that wisdom. Like we're trying not to shop on Sabbath, whether that's in-store or online. It's one thing to say, okay, I'm not going to go to the store, but I'm going to sit on my couch and I'm going to, no, I'm putting my phone away and not having anything to do with it. So if you call me on Friday night through Saturday, I'm not going to answer because actually I'm not going to see that you called me because my phone's not going to be there. It's on Do Not Disturb from 7 p.m. Friday night to 7 p.m. Saturday night. And it's out the way so I don't shop because that's what I would do otherwise sitting on my phone. not even just to browse. There's a store, it's a really big like electronic store. It's called B&H Photo. It's in New York, and it's a Jewish run and owned company, and you can't check out on their website on the Sabbath. From sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, you can't check out. You can still browse. You can still put stuff in your car. You can't check out. So I'm like, I'm not even going to do that. I'm not even browsing, because what's it doing? It's feeding my want for more. It's feeding my desire for accumulation. And I don't need that. As much as there's stuff that I want and I would love to have, do I need it? Actually, no, I don't. And at least for one day. I've got 6 other days I can shop online to my heart's content. But for one day, I'm not going to do that. And the thing is, when we stop wanting, even for a day, it allows us to learn gratitude for what we already have. When every time I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm just, kicking back, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can get that, or I wonder if that's on sale. And I stop myself and go, nope, not today. God, thank you so much for so much that you've given me, so much that you've provided me with. It's a great way that we can stir up gratitude within our hearts. Because, accomplishment and accumulation are not evil in and of themselves. They can even be good things, but there's a limit. At some point, you need to draw a line in the sand and say, this far you shall go and no further. For those of you who are that way inclined, you may even need just to think of yourself as Gandalf. You shall not pass, right? Stick your staff in the ground and draw a line. Look, Pharaoh and his army at the bottom of the Red Sea. We are not slaves. We are free. And we have all that we need to thrive with God in this world. You need to remind yourself that you are in a new kingdom now with a new king. You are not subject to this culture of Egypt that's pervaded the world around us. And of course, that all sounds great. Sabbath as an act of resistance. But that means that when you practice Sabbath, you are going to feel resistance to your act of resistance. When you resist something, there's resistance like coming back against you, right? In what you're trying to do. There's external resistance. The culture around you is a Sabbathless, rhythmless, hollow out your soul culture. To Sabbath well requires intentionality, it requires preparation, and it requires a resolute determination to go against the flow of the cultural tide, like to live differently. It's not easy. In reality, we're standing against what the Apostle Paul calls the principalities and powers in Ephesians. Those powers and principalities do not want you to Sabbath. They do not want you to go along with God's rhythm. They want you to go along with the flow of culture. They do not want you to resist. So you are going to experience resistance when you try and Sabbath. But through Sabbath, we defy those powers and we align ourselves with the God of Sabbath, the God of rest. But Egypt isn't just around us. Egypt is also in us. We're going to experience internal resistance to it. Like to Sabbath, to rest, we have to resist the internal dynamics of restlessness that are within our hearts because we're fallen people. Greed, envy, discontentment, anxiety, addiction, and so on and so forth. All of those things dwell within us. In our apprenticeship to Jesus, we always experience a push-pull dynamic, right? We feel a pull towards Jesus and to his way, a genuine desire to be with him and to find rest for our souls, right? We want that. We desire that. But we also feel a push away from Jesus, a resistance or a reluctance to give up our own autonomy, to give up our own self-will, and to surrender to him. There's this dynamic going on within us the whole time. Yeah, we want to do the will of God, but we also don't. We also want to do things our own way. And in the practice of Sabbath, this push-pull dynamic is particularly evident because it's so countercultural to the way that we've been conditioned. We've grown up and been taught to do things a certain way, and a certain thing is expected. And Sabbath is so different. To say, hey, I'm not going to look at my phone for 24 hours? Who does that in this culture, in this day and age? Like, it's craziness. But actually, it's what we need. It's what this culture needs. Sabbath rest is your secret weapon in the struggle against the powers of this age. In those push-pull moments when you have to resist both those external forces and those internal forces that are anti-Sabbath, you need to remember that you are not a slave anymore. You don't have to go along with the way that this world does stuff. God is king, yes, but he's nothing like Pharaoh. He's a Sabbath-keeping, Sabbath-commanding God. Jesus called himself the Lord of the Sabbath, and he's offering you rest for your souls. So here's the question. What are you going to do about that? Are you going to choose to resist the world and rest in Jesus? Because that's what he's offering. But it's going to take resistance. It's going to take resistance to step into the rest for your souls that Jesus is offering. Let's just pray for a moment. Just take a deep breath and just pause, just rest, just stop. We thank you, Jesus, that you are the Lord of the Sabbath. And we thank you that despite this culture of Egypt that's been built around us, this relentless desire for more, this culture of restlessness that we live in, we thank you that there is another way. That you are the God of the Sabbath and that you are a God of rest, and you invite us into rest for our souls. We do not have to carry the heavy burden that this culture, that this world wants to pin on us. But we've been set free. We get to carry your easy and your light yoke instead. And it's there in that place that we find rest for our souls. So God, we pray that you would help us. You would give us focus. You would give us determination. You would help us to resist. God, we need your empowerment, Holy Spirit, to resist the pulls that are on us, both internal and external, that we might turn and give ourselves fully over to you, fully over to the practice of Sabbath. Before we get back into our groups in a moment, we're just going to take a second and just watch a little video testimony of one lady in particular that has really been able to put this practice of Sabbath into her life and the struggles that it was, but the benefit of doing that. So if we want to play that video, Sophie, that would be awesome.
My name is Deidre. I'm a mom. I have 3 young adult children. I'm also a pediatrician, working full-time, seeing patients. And for me to be able to Sabbath, and it started with me doing some of my to-do list on Friday, and then being very clear with my team that I was signing off email and having a tagline that I won't be responding to emails until Monday morning, which at first that was really challenging because a lot of work I realized happened on the weekends. But one of the benefits of me doing that as a leader in the organization is that set an expectation over time, and I think other people actually appropriately were able to step away from work as well. In the United States, we're driven by accomplishment and we're independent, and so to Sabbath, you have to pause, you have to give up what it is that you're accomplishing and say, like physically, mentally, spiritually, that God, you're enough. And it's not about what I'm doing or what I can accomplish. And I don't think that that is an alignment with my generation or our culture or our society to pause and to relinquish control, and to be out of touch for any extended amount of time. I think the hardest part for me when I first started was setting aside all the things that I would normally do during that day, and be focused on not doing. And that is not my personality. I'm a single mom with 3 kids who works full time. And so there's always something that I should be thinking about doing or actually doing. That discipline of saying, I'm going to step away and I'm not going to be available to work. I'm going to rest and I'm going to go out in nature. I'm going to connect with friends. I'm going to worship and I'm going to celebrate.
So good. So many good things to think about whenever I hear this teaching. It really gets me thinking all the things I want to change. So we are now going to get back into those same groups, discussion groups that we were in earlier. And we have 3 questions to go over in your groups as we get back together. And so those questions will be up on the screen, but they are: where are you most tired? Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? What is the greatest drain on your energies? Second question: what is the strongest force of resistance in your life? That might be external or internal. What attempts to keep you from Sabbath rest? What are those things that attempt you to keep from Sabbath rest? And then number 3, what are the hardest things for you to say no to on the Sabbath? And it might just be, what are the hardest things to say no to in general? Because if they're hard to say no to on any given day, they're going to be hard to say no to on the Sabbath.
Each week of practicing Sabbath builds on the other. So we did week 1 2 weeks ago, and this is obviously week 2. And what we had last time we had you guys do was choose a time to Sabbath, whether that was like a Christian Sabbath on Sunday, a traditional Sabbath, Friday night to Saturday night, or a midweek Sabbath that just fits in with your week schedule. So you picked a time. We had you guys pick a starting and an end ritual. So our start ritual was to have dinner together as a family and do a devotion. Like that's what we did. We do as a family for Sabbath on Friday night. And we had you pick some Sabbath activities to do from the list that you found in here. So, some things that you had fun and that you enjoyed and brought you life. And so you want to keep doing those same 3 things, still keep doing those things. But this week, we've got 3 new exercises to add in. So if you've got your companion guidebook, turn to page 34. And as I said, we've got 3 new exercises. The first exercise is to help you to prepare for the day. So in the Bible, the day before the Sabbath was called the day of preparation. Because actually, we need time to prepare to Sabbath. Like Sabbath is not just going to happen by accident. It's too countercultural. So this week's exercise is to set a little time aside, maybe on the night before or maybe in the afternoon leading up to the Sabbath, and prepare.
Yeah, so some things that you might want to do in that preparation period, things like go grocery shopping so you can eat, plan your meals so you know what to eat, you don't have to think about that, clean and tidy your home, run any errands or pay any bills that you've got to get done in that time period, answer all of your emails, text messages, make sure you get back to people so they don't need anything from you during that time, make plans to meet with friends and family, plan some fun activities, some things that are life-bringing to you that you want to not accomplish, but do enjoy during Sabbath. And you might want to do a little or a lot on your Sabbath. It's up to you. But however much you are going to do and want to do, preparation is going to help you to be able to enjoy that time the most.
Okay, so that's exercise 1. Exercise 2 is prepare for external resistance. So there is a list of cultural forces that you might want to choose to say no to. Maybe pick 1 to 3 of those forces, like your phone, social media, the internet, TV and entertainment, shopping, social obligations, sports, weekend work, chores, errands. And this is not a whole list of like everyone's Sabbath has to not include any of those things. like I've decided, for me personally, watching a soccer game on Sabbath is like, that's going to be part of my Sabbath right there. That's like, okay, but for others of you, that sports might be a thing. You're like, no, it's just too much. It's not restful. It draws, no, I'm just not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. Whereas on the other hand, like my phone is definitely for me is a no-no. I definitely am going to, put my phone away on Sabbath. So pick 1 to 3 of those cultural forces to say no to on your Sabbath.
And then number 3, we want to prepare for internal resistance. And to help us do that, there is a simple journaling exercise to do during your next Sabbath, your upcoming Sabbath. And you can find that there's some prompts to do that in the companion guide as well. And that's on page 35. So you find a quiet, distraction-free space and just give some time to think about these things and to prepare and to rest in God and follow those prayer prompts that you find to just help you prepare for those internal resistance things that may well come up as you Sabbath.
And then each week, as we mentioned last time, there's a reach exercise for those of you who want to go further. You're like, man, I'm on fire. I'm Sabbathing like whatever you would Sabbath like. And I just want to go deeper. I want to go further with this. So on page 38, you're going to find some suggested reading. The next section of the book Sabbath by Dan Allender, which I've been reading. It's a good read if you guys want to check it out. Suggested reading. There's episode 2 of a podcast from Practice in the Way that you can listen to. And then the reach exercise for this week is a digital Sabbath. So the suggestion is to try turning off all of your devices, including your phone, for a full 24-hour period, or at least for a good portion of your Sabbath. And really to make that the most effective, we suggest putting the devices away, put them in a drawer, bury them under your socks or something like that. Put them out of sight, out of the way, to minimize the temptation to use them.
I've heard of some people using these kind of lock boxes for their phone that they time you out, so you actually can't get in it until you need it. I may need to do that. It's quite extreme, but I might need to. And then finally, after you've completed your next Sabbath, whether that's today if you're Sabbathing on a Sunday or whenever it is during the week, you're going to want to complete another reflection exercise, just like we did for this past one. And so that's going to be on page 40 this time in your book. Because remember that we don't change from our experience, but we change from reflecting on our experience. When we take time to pause and reflect and see what we've learned, that's where the real change can happen. So between your Sabbath, whenever that ends, and then the next time that we gather next Sunday, take a few minutes, use that reflection guide in the book, and answer those questions.